I wonder if you guys are the same as me. I wonder if you sometimes have fighters that you can't make your mind up on and that you can't work out. For me, one of the fighters I have the biggest problems discussing and analysing and really coming to form an opinion on is actually Badou Jack. When anyone says the word Badou Jack to me, the first thing I picture is him getting iced out by Derek Edwards, you know, the sort of high-level gatekeeper in the super middleweight division. And I always think after that it's going to be tough for him to beat the elite level names of the sport. But then he's come back, you know, he's 20 victories to his name, he's the WBC champion, and he's put together back-to-back wins over Anthony Durrell and George Groves. And I must admit, I picked Anthony Durrell to beat George Groves. At the time, Anthony Durrell was champion. He was known as a decent puncher. We'd just seen Badou Jack knocked out by Derek Edwards. And then I picked George Groves to beat Badou Jack. Groves had lost twice to Frotz, but again had shown good punching power. And I still couldn't get the Derek Edwards thing out of my head. And I think Badou Jack is proof that a devastating knockout when you're at the prospect stage of your career doesn't necessarily mean you can't improve and can't get beyond that, because he's shown that he deserves to be very much one of the top super middleweights in the sport, given his wins over Groves and Durrell. But I still find him hard to work out, because I look at him and I still think about the Edwards thing, and then I think, how good was Anthony Durrell to begin with? You know, how highly do I actually rate Anthony Durrell? And then I look and think, how highly do I rate George Groves? Specifically, how highly do I rate a Paddy Fitzpatrick version of George Groves? And again, both of those fighters are hard to sum up. You know, they're both very, very capable fighters, don't get me wrong. But it's hard to say either of those guys are truly elite world class. So Badou Jack's a hard guy to sum up in terms of his record. I also think he's a very hard guy to sum up in terms of his eye test. You know, if I look at Badou Jack and if I watch his fights, respectable power, good movement, respectable jab, can go to the body, respectable straight right cross, a decent hook, a good engine, you know, the ability to grind down an opponent, perhaps an underrated inside game. Very strong. And I guess what I'm getting at with Badou Jack is, I was talking with Ultratech Sports the other day about boxing top trumps, and I know boxing isn't a game of top trumps, but if you listed Badou Jack, I'd almost give him a 7 or an 8 in every category. I don't look at the guy and think he's visually spectacular. There's nothing that immediately stands out in his game that makes me think this guy is a pound for pound level fighter, or, you know, going to be a really dominant champion. But then I take the alternative view and I think, actually, this guy is very well rounded. He does everything quite well. He doesn't have gaping weaknesses. And perhaps the fact that he's 7 or 8 out of 10 across the board actually creates a 9 or 10 out of 10 fighter. You know, perhaps the fact that he is so solid in so many different areas, we should respect him as a legitimate top-class fighter. And it's something that I'm still struggling to form a definite opinion on, actually. But one thing I would say about Badou Jack is he is versatile, and there are underrated elements to his game. You know, I think you hear people talking about the George Groves jab, and the George Groves jab is a very, very good weapon. Badou Jack's got a good jab. Badou Jack is rough and tough on the inside. Badou Jack's stamina and engine is impressive to me. And Badou Jack has some power, you know. We saw him knock out the guy who James DeGale is fighting this week, Medina, for example. We've seen him stop a few other guys of note. I think he's got a 60% ratio of knockouts for the fights that he's won. So Badou Jack, I mean, that's my quandary with him. I can't quite make up my mind if he is slightly unspectacular and if the Derek Edwards loss is always going to be in my mind, no matter what he goes on to do. And then at other times I think, actually, this guy is so solid and he's quite well-rounded. You know, maybe he's improved and developed into a really, really elite level fighter. And then I look at Lucian Bute. You know, when the fight was initially announced, I was inclined to think that Lucian Bute had a good chance in this fight. And let me say, I might discuss this in a separate video, and I think from a gambling perspective, Lucian Bute is underrated from a pure odds perspective. But when the fight was announced, let's take gambling out of it, I thought to myself, you know, Lucian Bute is decent. Again, Lucian Bute is probably best known to British fans for his loss to Carl Frost. But put that aside, he went the distance in a semi-competitive match with John Pascal. He went the distance in a very competitive match back down at 168 versus James DeGale. And, you know, there were some people out there who say he beat James DeGale that day. Either way, let's agree, he took multiple rounds of James DeGale. Bute himself is a versatile fighter. He can move. He has some semblance of power. Despite the Frost loss, he has shown a good chin at other times during his career. Bute is actually a tidy boxer from the outside. He can put straight punches together, long punches together well. As he showed in the James DeGale fight, he can get in the pocket and scrap. He's not afraid to scrap. He's not afraid to throw punches from very, very close range. You know, Bute is an interesting fighter in his own right. And when the fight was initially announced, I was thinking 50-50. Maybe with a view to picking Bute. You know, I was thinking, if Bute is good enough to take 4 or 5 rounds off James DeGale, maybe more on your scorecard, perhaps he's good enough to take 6 or 7 rounds off Badou Jack, because I don't see the world-class assets in Badou Jack that I see on James DeGale. But before making this video, I've sat down and I've actually been watching a lot of boxing tonight. I've been watching some clips of Bute, DeGale, Groves, Jack Medina, Jack Dirrell, Jack Edwards. And I actually think, and this is something I say all the time on my channel, so apologies if it's getting boring, but momentum is so key in boxing. Yeah, Lucian Bute, he's an older guy. He's had some bad losses in his career. He's only lost at a good level, you know, Frost, Pascal, DeGale. But he's someone who's experimented with weight classes, experimented with different styles of fighting. He's taken 1 or 2 losses. And you'd have to say this probably represents last chance saloon for him at world title level. He's actually done very, very well to get in a fight of this nature straight after a loss to James DeGale. But you just wonder if the momentum here is with Badou Jack, and momentum is so key in boxing. You know, Badou Jack is on course for a big fight with James DeGale, you know, a big unification match. For what it's worth, I'm not completely sold that that fight goes ahead. So I think the money needed to make that fight in the UK would ensure that it would have to be pay-per-view. And I'm not sure Eddie Hearn is convinced it is a pay-per-view fight. And to be honest, I'm not convinced it's a pay-per-view fight, because I'm just not sure either guy has crossed over to the average boxing fan who's going to buy a pay-per-view. So I'm unconvinced about whether that fight will take place. I think if George Groves was to beat Martin Murray and James DeGale was to beat Medina, that is a ready-made pay-per-view fight. And whilst it's not a unification fight, it's a bigger money fight for both guys. And I think DeGale may be more inclined to take that fight in a massive stadium in the UK on pay-per-view than what could potentially be a harder fight against Badou Jack. But regardless, I mean, Badou Jack is staring down the gun of what he believes to be a James DeGale unification, which would be the biggest fight of his career. He's coming off the back of the biggest wins of his career. You know, he's headlining the card, and he's up against a guy who I think's had 1 or 2 losses in his last 2 or 3 fights. Who's had to change weight class relatively recently. You know, he's up against a guy who's in the autumn of his career, as we say. And whilst I could see Lucian Bute having success on the outside and on the inside, Badou Jack is actually a harder guy than he looks to beat. He's got a little bit of the Danny Garcia effect on him, you know, looks 7 out of 10. When you get in there with him, he's clearly a hard man to beat. You know, I was watching some of the subtleties in his game when he fought George Groves. Constantly moving, constantly adjusting the reins, on his toes, you know, the ability to dance on his toes for round after round after round. A decent jab, a jab that changes levels, you know, that sort of pincer-like jab that goes out to the stomach. This guy, he may not be the flashiest from the outside. Lucian Bute may have slightly prettier combinations from the outside, but he's a hard guy to outwork on the outside. Again, Bute showed in the Gale fight he's keen for a scrap on the inside, but you know, Badou Jack is strong and tough, and in a close fight that genuinely could go either way. And Lucian Bute is underrated by the bookmakers here. I think I'm going to try and extend my prediction streak, which currently stands at 5 correct on the bounce, by going with Badou Jack. I've picked against Badou Jack, as I said. I picked against him against Durrell, I picked against him against George Groves, and I've underestimated him both times. The guy's very solid, he's got all the momentum in the world, and the more I watch of him, the more I'm starting to think, instead of Badou Jack being unspectacular in terms of power, unspectacular in terms of speed, perhaps I should view him as well-rounded in the majority of areas. Perhaps he's someone that I've misjudged in the past. Momentum's key. Bute's not getting any younger. He's coming off a few defeats. This is his last chance fight, I think, and he's capable on his day. I'm just going to edge to Badou Jack in what I think is a close fight that probably goes the distance. Badou Jack on points for me. Let me know your thoughts. Who do you think is going to win this fight? Do you give Bute a chance? If you've enjoyed this video, please do hit the thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel, please do subscribe. I'll do post-fight videos on these fights, so hope you don't miss out on those. Thanks for watching, guys.